We're excited to have people who have all been in the Techonomy and CDX community in the past, really talking about this idea of health and wealth of America. David will talk a little more about the broad theme, but really today is to start to set the stage about an initiative we will launch come October called the Health and Wealth of America. Now the website's live, healthandwealthofamerica.com, where we'll start an exploration broadly about what that means, right? Health, not just as healthcare and the pandemic per se, but the health of America, everything from the environment, climate change, small business, wealth, everything from income inequality to the digital divide. So we're excited to launch that initiative starting October. It'll go through, it'll be a 3-day event in October, followed by a series of weekly sessions. And then we'll have an additional 3-day conversation in early December, hopefully following election results. Hopefully by early December, we'll have some type of election results. But without further ado, I'll ask David to come on, talk a little about this theme. And again, feel free to use the chat, send us questions, and we'll try to pull you in throughout the next hour.
Well, thank you, Josh. And just this Health and Wealth of America thing is going to be a sort of joint venture of Techonomy and CDX, which is run by Drew Ianni as part of the Techonomy organization. It's focused on digital transformation. I'm going to ask Drew to say a few things right after this about how he sees the project. We're also partnering with Worth, which is part of the same media family as we are in. But I think the purpose of taking health and wealth as a theme for us, which is a little less techy and a little more driven by American concerns than we normally are. We're pretty international and digitally focused most of the time, but I think we see the country at a kind of turning point. And obviously the election is part of that, but it's not the only part of it by any means. There are an awful lot of issues that our country is facing, some of them promising, some of them worrisome. We aim to talk about them all, but certainly healthcare and health writ large, everything from how we're dealing with COVID to the health of the American economy, which is of course the wealth side. We really mean to use both these words in their biggest possible sense. And so what we've done today is asked 4 very expert friends of Techonomy to join in a kind of exploration session on what are the issues that we really ought to be thinking about as we plan this ongoing initiative, which, as Josh mentioned, is going to begin with 3 afternoons, October 13th through 15th, continue with weekly sessions. Then in December 1st through 3rd, another 3 afternoons. And we are deliberately bracketing the election, as Josh mentioned. But we're going to continue after that as well with this theme because we think it's not going to be any less urgent. So what we've asked each of these people to do is to speak for 5 minutes, roughly, more, a little less if they want to, a tiny bit more if need be, about how they would define the concept of the health and wealth of America, what their priorities would be, what in effect, what we should then be thinking our priorities ought to be. So, and let me quickly tell you who they are. And this is the order in which they're going to be speaking. Esther Dyson, who has been an inspiration for me since her own Release 1.0 and conference and writing way back when I first started covering tech in the early 90s. I learned a lot about being a conference moderator from Esther. She's also been an investor all these years, focused, as someone just said in the chat recently, heavily on Eastern Europe. But in recent years, she's really honed in on health. And she's currently running a project called Wellville in 5 mid-sized American city regions, including Muskegon, Michigan, and Spartanburg, North Carolina, or is it South Carolina? I forget.
South Carolina.
Oh,
they're little communities, actually.
They're little communities. But anyway, the reason she's so good here today is she's really deep in what's happening in these communities all across the country and in terms of general wellness. So that really includes, I think, health and wealth. So we'll start with her. After that, we'll hear from Ritesh Patel, who's the Chief Digital Officer at Ogilvy. And while he has that big picture role for all of Ogilvy, he is a longtime health expert and comes really heavily out of the healthcare arena and has a lot of knowledge about that. Next, we'll hear from Valerie Mccall, who is, and she's got a great title, Chief of Communications, Government, and International Affairs for the City of Cleveland. That's kind of like pretty much almost everything. She's definitely a very top aide, probably the most senior aide to Mayor Frank Jackson of Cleveland. And she's deeply rooted in one of America's most important cities. And we're very eager to hear her perspective on cities and what she knows about what's happening there and how we ought to think about the whole country based on her experience. And then we're going to wrap with what may be our biggest picture speaker, Matthew Bishop, who was, like myself, a journalist, a very long-time friend of Techonomy, who was at The Economist for decades, has written a number of books. He really does have a big economic view, but much of his writing and much of his work focuses on the responsibilities of business in a evolving era going forward, and this whole question of what companies really need to do for society. But he also has a lot of knowledge about competitiveness of nations, and he's going to share with us some maybe distressing news about the country compared to the rest of the world. So anyway, that's who you're going to hear. But I want to throw it to Drew just for 1 or 2 minutes to get, digital transformation, CDX. When you think of health and wealth and what you want to be doing for this event, Drew, what are your priorities?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. And I'll keep this brief because I know we want to get to the panelists, and it's great to be part of the Techonomy family. Thank you to the panelists. A special thank you to Ritesh, who every time I ask him to do something says yes. So thank you, Ritesh. And good to see some familiar faces out in the audience. Matt Quint just chimed in with the comments. So that's always great too. So thanks for joining. So quickly, I'm an optimist. I'm a glass half full kind of guy. So despite the problems we have today, we all know what they are. We all know what's at stake in the election. We've been focusing on innovation and transformation for 8 or 9 years. Ritesh and I were doing conferences together a year or 2 ago and talking about innovation and exciting things that were happening. So even before COVID, I think there was a lot of, sort of digital transformation and innovation and exciting things going on in the health, broader space. I think it's very interesting. We talk about accelerating digital transformation now and innovation, and I think that's happened during this time of COVID. So I think, despite all our problems, there are a lot of really interesting things going on. And I also look forward to hearing Ritesh about, this effort to produce a vaccine, while it's been politicized, whether it's October, November, January, or spring, it's still record time. It's pretty phenomenal. So I think what's happening on the innovation side regarding the vaccine, despite its politicization, if that's a word, is pretty impressive. So, I want to look at the innovations and the exciting things happening. And like I said, we all know what's at stake in the election, and we'll solve the problems. We'll move on as we always do. And I'll leave it there and look forward to this conversation.
Hey, that's great, and that was not what I thought you'd say, but it's really good. Actually, I'm glad you did. Drew is not terribly optimistic politically. Let's just put it that way. So that was a surprise. But Josh, do we have the poll results? I think it might be fun to share those now before we get started, if you don't mind.
Share the results here. Okay,
let's just quickly look through this. Generally, as a group, you're not very optimistic. 7% of you are despairing. That's too bad, but I'm not shocked. How important is the election in determining the future health and wealth of America? I'm really glad to get an answer to this because it's really going to affect how we program our event and how we conduct the discussions there. And 73% of you think it's totally central. That should be discussed today, and that should also be discussed at all these events. Biden is your clear choice. 13% of you support Trump. That shows we're not a completely partisan group. By the next year, I expect the American economy to be stronger or else depend on the election's outcome. That's close, a little bit more on the election outcome. Fair number of you think it'll be weaker no matter what. And this is something that doesn't shock me. And no matter what happens, American healthcare seems to many of us to be improving and becoming more digital and accessible. That's something I was just writing about yesterday, in fact, and I wonder if our speakers agree with that. Maybe Esther can address that in the next 5 minutes. 93% of you are concerned about America's standing in the world. Now, is that, Okay, that 7% is smaller than the percentage, 13% that supported Trump. So that even some of the Trump supporters are concerned about America's standing in the world, which is interesting. The dialogue about equality and inclusion, which has been so front and center in recent months in the United States, pretty much everyone thinks it's important or very important. Finally, we asked you to pick 4 among this really laundry list. Healthcare, education, infrastructure, and equality are the ones that came to the fore, which doesn't surprise me. Okay, so Esther, take it away.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. And David, thank you. This is really a pleasure. So I have 5 minutes, and unfortunately, I have a pre-existing condition that starts at around 1:35. So I'd like to cover.
We're going to miss you, but thank you.
Thank you.
That's why you're going first.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So I want to make some very brief remarks, sort of in the context of these poll questions, and also very personally. So the question is the economy going to be stronger or weaker? And it's kind of like, right now, the economy is like a cancer patient in surgery. There's cancer in there, there's blood all over the place. You know, we become aware of the inequities, the healthcare challenges, the fact that half the country or more is actually unusually susceptible to COVID-19 because they're not healthy. You know, it's a real mess. And so the question, in a sense, you're asking is, when we put the patient back together and you know, send them out of the hospital in 6 months from now, are they going to be healthier or not? And you know, I don't really know, because I don't know if we're going to take out that cancer or not. And it's the cancer we need to deal with, not the overall health, because we don't deal with the cancer, the patient may look healthy, but they're going to walk away basically crumbling inside. And this country and the health of its people has been crumbling inside for a long time. But
the cancer being what exactly, Esther?
Inequity, bad healthcare, bad education, bad food, you know, policies. And then we come to the inequity part, which is also very personal. I fell in the street and fractured my hip in July. And so now I have this incredibly strong left leg, but my right leg is atrophying. And the country is also kind of like that. I mean, the rich people right now, there's more private aviation now, I think, than last year. There's definitely, you know, compared to regular commercial aviation or travel in general, it's amazing. Rich people are going to New Zealand, they're going to the islands, they're going to the Hamptons. And meanwhile, this atrophied leg is getting worse and worse and worse, because all these challenges just magnify this disparity. And in the same way, our education system is stacked against the poor. And especially now, the poor might not even have the electronic capacity to attend school remotely. The people who are poor are the ones who are working on the front lines, not just in healthcare, but in the groceries. You know, I can spend 15 minutes on this and I won't, but there are these things that are being revealed with this cancer patient on the table. And I'm pessimistic, but I'm acting optimistic. Because if you don't act optimistic, there's no way things are going to get better. And if you act pessimistic, you might as well just give up. So I'm doing something called Wellville, which is working in these 5 small communities, trying to help them deal with these problems. And we're in fact changing our approach. We were kind of being just coaches, but we're starting to actually meddle a bit more and step in with funding where the government doesn't or won't, because it's like you can sit and do a scientific experiment, but I don't want to experiment anymore. We need to actually, you know, take some of that healthy tissue and apply it to the rest of the country that is bleeding. I really don't have time to go into all this, but there are 5 small communities. We're working with them at the community level, not at the, are you covered by insurance? We're talking about the things that build resilience, not about the Band-Aids that you apply later. So maternal care, health counseling, mental health support, working with the schools, delivering food to people who are no longer getting it through their schools. Just what we're doing is we're investing in human infrastructure, not just physical infrastructure. And we want to learn how to do it better. We want to have stories to tell. We want to work with people like you, so that we want to scale by having other communities follow our example rather than by making Wellville itself bigger. And for that, you need stories that are inspirational, but that are true. You know, these are real communities, they're real places. They're not manufactured communities. That would be easy to make those perfect, but how do you find a living place with real people in it and help them, not by giving them fish, not by teaching them how to fish, but by helping them to build their own fishing schools. So that's fundamentally what we're doing. And I just want to end with our quadrant chart. So everybody has to have a quadrant chart. And here on the lower left corner, there is.
Are you sharing your screen, Esther? Can you?
No, I'm not. I'm making you imagine it, so it will stay in your head.
Okay.
Thank you. So here in the lower left corner, and I'm imagining that this is the left, is basically the person who thinks about themselves all the time. And ultimately, that's the addict. I need something, I need it now. I don't care about everybody else. Give me my drug, give me my sex, give me my food, give me my Facebook. But this is what I need now. And it turns from a narrative arc into an endless loop of desire and temporary relief and desire, but there's no real satisfaction or joy. Then on the top of the quadrant chart, there's the benevolent billionaire, gives this person $1,000. They go out and spend it immediately on this thing they need right away. Then the billionaire suddenly realizes he should be thinking long-term, and he thinks about his grandkids, and he gives them all a lot of money, and he invests for the long term. But what we really need to do is go to the upper right-hand corner and invest for the long term for everybody. So the billionaire should be thinking about his grandchildren's schoolmates and the country he lives in. And what we're trying to do is move society to thinking both about the long term and about equity across the country. And happy to tell you all more, but that's my story.
That was kind of a beautiful ending, Esther, so thank you. Okay, and we're sorry we're going to miss you, but we may.
But I'm going to listen as long as I can.
Giving the timing situation. Ritesh, take it away.
So who can follow Esther? I mean, you know, thanks a lot, guys.
Oh, by the way, what movie are you in the midst of there?
This is my my lair where I control everything. So if anybody upsets me, I'll press the button and I'll just kill everything on the internet. So,
can you use it to fix things?
Yeah, that's the problem. I can't. It's the rebel base on Tatooine in Star Wars.
Okay.
To answer your question. Look, you know, Esther's launched a lot of points, and those are all absolutely the biggest issues we're facing. If you look at what's happening today, 36 million people in this country will be uninsured. So those people who had insurance is getting taken away from them. Employers are not providing it if you're unemployed. You know, so we've got just a mere access to anything problem now starting to bubble up as part of this. COVID has absolutely shown the cracks in the systems. I focus on 2 areas, and so I'll only speak on those 2, healthcare and digital. So as Drew knows, my view is if it moves, digitize it. You know, from those lenses is where I speak. If you've got people who are not going to be able to get any kind of care given to them because of a financial issue, you've got a bigger problem coming. COVID has also shown cracks in how we deliver care. You know, you have to find a specialist. You have to go to a building where lockdowns have stopped all of that as well. So we're going to face a tsunami of people hitting our health systems once the vaccines arrive and people go to some semblance of normality of all those chronic things that we put off. Esther's hip replacement, for example, right? So those things are going to hit the health systems very hard, and I'm not sure they're prepared for it. We've got another wave that's hitting us, which is a lot of healthcare professionals on the front lines are leaving. They've had it, they're done, or will be suffering from a long-term PTSD issue. So what are we going to do about that? Not many people are thinking about the mental health and well-being of the first responders in this country, or in any country actually, around the world. We have some long-term things that are about to hit us in the next 18, 24 months that we are not planning for at the moment. The chronic care folks coming back. And then you've got the disparity of care, which has always been, but COVID has actually shown us that it is a reality and it's a bigger issue than anybody imagined, right? It's now showing us in those cracks that, there are some amazing memes going around. Your zip code will define whether you'll live better or not, right? And that's a true fact. A lot of people do believe it. Now we've got the data to prove it. Esther's done a bit of work in that area around the disparity of care. I fear that we are creating, to your point, Esther, a two-tier health system. We already had it, but now it's become normal. Those who can afford it and get the care, concierge care was taking off, the forwards and the clinics that were popping up where you pay $99 a year and you get access to everything, right? They do your full body scan, they weigh you, they've got dietitians, they've got mental health people. That is continuing and growing. I haven't seen Forward declare bankruptcy. They're continuing to grow. So I think those are the kinds of issues that we're facing in healthcare that we will have to resolve and resolve fast. And I'm hoping that some of the smaller pieces that COVID has enabled will continue. One of them, and I'm going to end some of the highs that we're seeing, the good stuff that's coming out. That's the bad stuff. Some of the good stuff that's coming out, telehealth. I work with a group of folks who work with rural hospitals. We've seen the rural hospital basically get decimated, right? The big IDNs are shutting those down. Well, thank God for telehealth, but we have another issue, which is we need bandwidth to enable that telehealth. So let's get that going. But telehealth will continue. What COVID forced upon us, I think, will be 30% of normality. Some of the PCPs and GPs I talk to, they're saying 50% of my practice when we get back to normal will be telehealth, and I will encourage it. Connected devices, changing the way we do things. I saw a fantastic idea, a first aid kit for the 21st century. So instead of you not coming to the hospital for your chronic checkups, we'll send you a kit. Mount Sinai at home, let's imagine. In there is an Alive Core EKG, a stethoscope, an Omron blood pressure cup, all the things you need to do your test that you'd have to get in your car or get in an Uber, go wait in a waiting room with all these sick people around you, get to see the doctor, get your test done, and then go home. And then the doctor or nurse calls you 10 days later to say, hey, you've got something, better come back. This now becomes immediate. So some new innovations coming out around this digital first aid kit to get to those people who either don't want to come back to the building or can't for any reason. I think that will change that. FDA, the rules that they're making on digital therapeutics, pre-certifying medical devices, things that can speed up the ability to do all of this stuff is a great idea, because for years I've been telling Bakul Patel over at the FDA that you're 5 years behind where society is and where people need these things. You need to catch up from a rules and regulations perspective. CMS is doing the same thing. So some of those good things have come about. The open data rules that go into effect in November will start a whole new slew of innovations around you being able to access your data. Try and get your data from a doctor today. It's nigh on impossible. Absolutely impossible. If you're a cancer patient and you want to go to another cancer specialist, you've got to start all over again. But all of this stuff, with particularly the open data rules, I'm so hopeful that that will force the Epics and the Cerners and the Allscripts of this world to give you access to the data that you can then give to the patients, right? And then lastly, I've seen a lot of innovations around the retailers. They've been forced. The Walgreens and the CVSs of this world have really been forced to change their model. So we're now seeing Postmates delivering your medicine to you in urban cities where Postmates operates, right? So you get your prescription filled on the app, and then Postmates deliver it. New business models, Roman, Hims, Hers, now coming through, selling direct, doing e-commerce directly. So some of those things that you were waiting or would go to a building to get or whatever, you get, you know, Roman is a great, and Hims is a great model. You put your profile in, you talk to a doctor via telehealth, stuff arrives in a box, weekly, monthly, based on your subscription. What could be better, right? So those kinds of new models being thrown into our health system are going to be good, but they're not global, they're not big. NHS is doing some good stuff. Germany with the Digital Act is doing good stuff. And the Asia markets have been doing this for a while. Ping An and Good Doctor in China have been doing this for a while. So we need to come back and really stake this as a federal thing rather than the, you know, those little pockets of things that are going on. Lastly, I think we absolutely need to focus on the disparities of health. If we don't fix that, we'll never get out of the mess we're in. There you are.
Thank you, Ritesh. That was great.
Thank you, Ritesh. I guess goodbye, Esther. Too bad. Well, thank you, Ritesh. Valerie, it's so good to have you, and thank you for joining us. So from your perspective, respond to anything you've heard so far, or tell us how does the health and wealth of America's prospect look to you from the mayor's office in Cleveland?
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for having me. I do want to say, I think this session gets the best intro music, and Josh wins a 10 for that background, because if it's what I think it is, I'm going to be there in about 10 minutes when we get done.
That's not just a photo either, buddy.
No, it's real. No, I want to say, first of all, I think this has been a fantastic panel, and I love the space you're in right now in terms of talking about health and wealth. And so to your question, I'll reflect a little bit or respond a little bit to what I heard, but I'll start by telling you some of the things that we're doing here in Cleveland and what this pandemic has caused us to do from a governmental perspective. And so in Cleveland, obviously, we're dealing with two things. I want to be clear. We're literally under a civil proclamation of emergency, what we call it, around the pandemic, right? So, you know, our state has some mandates, we have mandates, and we're going to operate that way, quite honestly, for the foreseeable future. So what does that mean? We're still socially distancing with 10 people. We're still telling people to stay home if they can. We're telling people to wear their masks. All of those things we need to do. Our school system, CMSD, is under virtual option for the first 9 weeks. I suspect that's going to continue post this. And so we're dealing with that. But at the same time, we're also under the pandemic of the social justice, civil unrest. We don't want to forget about that, because as we talk about health and wealth, there's the physical health, there's the mental health, there's a formulation of social health that's in there as well. And so we're balancing all of that. The city of Cleveland overall, so far, knock on wood, this year we've been great, because our mayor has been preparing for a recession. While he always says you prepare for good times while in bad, and bad times while in good. And so budgetary wise for the rest of this calendar year, we will be okay. But with the uncertainty of funding coming down from the federal level, what we're going to find is there is going to become another urgent emergency, and that's going to be your local governments. Because the government closest to the people on the ground are local governments, your cities, your counties, and your states. And if they do not get the support and the level of attention that we're seeing happening on the corporate side, we're going to have a problem, a big time problem, bigger than dealing with the problem we're dealing with our residents being, you know, evicted because they don't have money, they're not working, so they're not getting the dollars that they were getting on unemployment. All of that has, while it may seem it's on the ground, that has a trickle up effect, and I don't want us to lose sight of that. I think, though, this pandemic has been quite interesting in opening up eyes to what a lot of us on the local level have been knowing: the disparities in healthcare, the social racial injustice, been there forever. A colleague of mine is I call him the data geek of our office, and he did an overlay of our zip codes in Cleveland that has the highest level of crime, the highest concentration of poverty. Actually, the zip code that I live in is one of the highest ones, even though I'm right next door to Cleveland Clinic, and all of the activity that happens, our second largest central business area in the city of Cleveland. And what he found was, if you look at air quality, migration, high blood pressure, all the things that we know are impacting African American, Black and brown people right now in COVID situations. If you look at just environmental policies that's been overlaid, all of those zip codes align with the areas that have the highest concentration of positive cases for COVID and fatalities. That is real. If you really think about, go back to redlining and you overlay that with a map of the highest areas of COVID cases, it's astonishing. And so what this pandemic has done, and I love the fact that there was on the survey about government and technology. What this is really telling us is the things that have been okay for some, the two Americas, if you want to use that scenario, is really rising to the forefront, and it is forcing its way to the table to be part of the discussion. And so while this is a bad time, before this call, I was on a call with my church. We have a mega church, and our pastor's trying to decide, do I open, do I not open? We have 3 big churches within one umbrella. And he came to the conclusion, we're not going to open right now because I don't care what other people are doing. We don't want to take that risk of having to put our members at risk. Lastly, I do think the political spectrum in which we're in right now is so important. And I know we're not really going there, but I'm gonna just throw it out there in the bubble, and then I'm gonna stop on purpose. So
it's okay to go there because it's really central to these issues.
If you really think about where we are, I saw something this morning where I think it's Britain is locking down. They're going through the second wave of COVID, and they put 2 million people under shutdown this morning as the second wave, whereas we're still in the first. I think, we globally are doing a disservice by not really trying to help right the ship of disinformation. If you look at the information that come out on COVID, and we're studying it daily, our mayor is paying attention to our numbers, who's being infected, how they're being infected, how we're being treated. We don't even want to go into the truth and the mystery, what's the truth and what's the reality around who can still get tested and who cannot get tested. Try to really get a test. If you really think about it, you've got to have a notice from your doctor. But if you're a poor person and you don't really have a care provider, how do you get a notice? Or you have to have an appointment. And if you don't know how to get an appointment, how do you get tested? So you have dynamics there. But I will also say that we're in a world right now that I didn't think I would see. You talk about Tell of Two Cities. We get some information around the COVID this way. And you got scientists and doctors saying, don't do all this stuff. But politically, we may have people say, no, you can do all that stuff. Don't worry about it. You don't need a mask. You don't really need to wash your hands. And you don't necessarily have to social distance. And then on the local level, we're the ones dealing with those fatalities or those chronic illnesses. And there's lasting long-term effects coming from this pandemic that we just don't know about. So you've got social unrest, you've got health disparities, you've got, as a local person in government, right? We put out the press releases. I won't name names. This telecompany has got 5G everywhere. And then this one got 5G in Cleveland. We're in your city and we're laying fiber everywhere. Then the pandemic hits, Pandora's box get open, and all that great stuff that we're talking about, it's either a lot of fluff or it's releasing it before it's in action, because we got kids that can't get on their laptops to learn. And even though we're giving them hotspots, the hotspots aren't working. And then you have this oversaturation of the little bit of bandwidth that's there right now that is maxed out because we really don't have the infrastructure. So this has been eye-opening in so many ways. And I think it's showing municipalities, your governors, either led on this pandemic or they didn't lead. However successful your governor was and how he worked with them or she is how good your city is doing. Here in Ohio, Governor DeWine has been really good. He does conference calls with the mayors of the big cities who are all Democrats twice a week. He checks in what's happening in your areas, and he's, behind the scenes, we can go back and forth, but he actually cares about what's happening in the state of Ohio, and he has a great working relationship with our community. And so you take all of that, and the takeaways are, we still have issues we have to deal with social unrest. This pandemic and the effects of it is going to be with us for a long time, but I think we have an opportunity to jump in front of it and be bold with it and do some things with it. And then lastly, again, your local governments, the cities that everybody on this panel is sitting in, Do you really know the health of your local government? We're picking up trash today. We still have officers, and no, we're not defunding the police, and we're still providing those basic services today, but we're not sure how long we can continue to do that. And so those are some of the things we're dealing with right now, and still trying to lead cities and plan for the future. Of course, I could go on, but I think I better stop there.
Well, you said a lot of great stuff, so thank you for that. That was quite even inspiring, not reassuring in every case by any means. Okay, Matthew, how can you wrap all this up to lead into our discussion portion here?
Yeah, are you able to show the slides I sent, or do I need to share a screen?
Does Josh have those slides? Because did you send them to me?
I don't have them, but Matthew, you should be able to.
Let me share my screen. Okay, so
yeah, if you got to share your screen, please do.
So what I want to do is just quickly give some data. This has been a really fascinating conversation so far. Can you see this chart?
Yeah.
Yeah. So out of the last financial crisis in 2008, I was part of a group that launched something called the Social Progress Index, which was really trying to measure how does a country perform using non-financial measures. So the world was obsessed with GDP and profit as the kind of indicator of how healthy and wealthy a country was. We said, well, let's balance that by creating a broad index that measures non-financial outcomes that benefit the citizenry. And they range from very basic needs like housing and shelter and basic healthcare through to opportunity like access to great higher education and rights like, you know, sort of level of tolerance and ability to marry who you want and that kind of thing. We've now got 10 years of data. What this measure allows you to do is to compare a country's social progress score with it's countries of similar GDP and say, well, who's outperforming relative to their wealth and income on social measures and who's underperforming. If you look at this year's announcement, which Nick Kristof actually wrote about last week in his column in the New York Times, America comes 28th in the world now, even though it's one of the biggest economies. And we would put it in the second tier of countries in terms of delivering social progress. So it's underperforming badly. And if you look at this next slide, sorry, back up here. We have a kind of dashboard of comparing America to about 15 countries.
If you zoom in on that at all, it would be easier to see. I don't know about anybody.
Okay, let me just see if you've got that. Okay.
That's going to be better. Oh, much better.
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah. So basically this compares America to 15 other countries with similar GDP per capita and on 52 different metrics of the Social Progress Index. And we give a red light for where it underperforms and a blue for where it outperforms. And basically America is underperforming, as you can see, all those red dots on everything from personal safety through to access to information. The only area it outperforms in is access to higher education. If you look at
look at that environmental quality, that's a surprise.
Yeah, yeah. So if you look at these summaries, America is spending more on healthcare, but delivers outcomes on a par with Chile, Jordan, and Albania. US, and then on education, US children get a similar score to Kyrgyzstan, Sri Lanka, and Botswana. Most countries have lower homicide rates than the US, and most advanced countries have lower traffic fatality rates and better sanitation. And the US ranks only 119th in environmental quality. And only China ranks worse in emissions of greenhouse gases. I mean, we then looked at, just to pick up Valerie's point.
Is that available on a website?
Yeah, socialprogress.org.
Okay, yeah. For those who are asking, socialprogress.org for get this data. Go on, Matthew.
And so we then, as COVID started to take hold, we picked up on Valerie's point that actually, to what extent does underperformance on social progress predict vulnerability to COVID? And we actually created something called the US COVID-19 Vulnerability Index in March, and it looked at the 500 largest cities in America down to the census tract level. And looked at health infrastructure, underlying health issues, and then various population demographics. And it basically predicted very accurately, you know, as the virus spread, where you know, the highest infection rates would be, and also, you know, sort of mortality.
Wow.
And you can see that it, for New York, for example, we were able to literally map the whole city in terms of where that we would expect there to be high vulnerability or low vulnerability to the neighborhood level. And we've done that for 500 cities across America. We also did similar work in India. And I do think that the points that come out of that are, you know, we do have data now that allows us to go be very precise in a way that wasn't really possible before in mapping health impacts and their correlations with other social factors. And the message is crystal clear that if you invest in broad-based social progress for your population, your country as a whole is much more resilient to these sort of crises when they happen, like a pandemic, but also neighborhoods that have that broad-based approach to delivering social progress are going to fare much better in these situations. So I think what it sort of brought home to me was the extent to which you can't separate health from other measures of social progress in some ways. In fact, areas where there were high opportunity, using our opportunity measure, also did better in terms of their ability to survive the pandemic. But also, you know, we can't, you know, as a world, as a country here in America, you can't say the economic issues and the structural injustices are unrelated. You know, the whole thing is highly connected. If you invest in social progress, broad-based social progress, you will have a more resilient community, a more resilient country that is going to suffer less of the economic damage, because these things all are highly connected. And so I do think that as you focus on this project going forward, seeing health in those broader terms is very important. And then learning from one of the purposes for creating the Social Progress Index was that we could learn from places around the world that outperform on different measures relative to GDP rather than underperform, like America does on so many things. You know, you can go and even learn from Albania as to what they're doing better on health care than America is. You know, you wouldn't necessarily have thought that America would need to do that, but this is the world we're living in, and we can learn from around the world from what works well. One other point I want to make is that I'm an economist by training for my sins, and as I see what's happening at the moment in the economy, at this very moment that we're having brought home to us how important you know, inequality is, in terms of the more inequality there is on these key measures of social progress, the more vulnerability there is. The underlying economic trends clearly are dramatically accelerating the inequality that was already, economic inequality that was already growing pre-COVID. And so, you know, it's not just the super rich that have been getting fantastically better off during this period. The employment prospects of those in the, you know, sort of the most educated, those with the highest skills, are much greater in a digital world. And many of the jobs that that involve sort of more of the population, they are more labor intensive jobs. Those jobs are actually more vulnerable to than they've ever been. And so, and my concern is that although it's fantastic that we are looking pretty optimistic about getting to a vaccine early next year, the reality is that vaccine, unless we do something dramatically differently than what I'm hearing, the vaccine is going to go to the better off in the world first.
Yeah.
And it's going to actually exacerbate even further the inequalities. And I look back at the last financial crisis, and everybody was worried for about 6 months that we needed to restructure the world and everything. There had to be a great redesign. And then quantitative easing took hold. So loads of money was pumped into the financial system. Anyone that had assets suddenly felt better off, and they forgot about all those structural reforms that were needed. I fear that the vaccine will be the equivalent of quantitative easing, and that suddenly the rich will be able to have their vaccines and get back on their planes and travel and see all their friends again, and suddenly all these structural reforms will be forgotten about. And so I do feel like this is an absolutely, you know, a limited window where we need to get these messages home about how fundamentally important it is that we address these massive structural problems in society and get America back on track to being an outperforming country on social progress relative to GDP rather than a horribly underperforming one. Wow.
That data was really useful and amazingly in sync with what Val was saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've taken a little longer in the presentations than we had expected, but I think that's all right. And we have one minor virtue, which is that Josh has had to go pick up his kid, although he's still shown to be there. I don't think he's actually there. And he's a little more of disciplined about ending on time. So with everyone's anyone who can stay, we may go a little bit over if that's all right. Because I think this issue that Esther made at the beginning, which you were in effect underscoring, Matthew, and so was Val, and actually so was Ritesh, that inequality is the other virus, right? That is really so key. And I forget where I saw it, but you know, your point with Matthew on the vaccine was underscored by an article I read recently, you know, by some doctor, you know, that when we have 1 billion doses of the virus, the choice is going to be, do they go to the countries that are richest that can buy them first, or do they go where in the world it's needed most? And if they go to the rich countries and keep them away from the poor countries, looking at it globally, that actually will be much worse long-term for economic growth globally. And that if we really want global wealth to continue to increase, we need to think of this COVID crisis as a global problem, because even if the US were to distribute the vaccine and we got whatever, you know, mythical herd immunity here, if we can't travel around the world and if global trade doesn't open up more, we will still be in a depressed situation relative to where we could have been. And I would welcome anybody, any of the panelists to comment on anything else that they've heard. Val or Ritesh, do you want to say anything about other things you've heard here?
So COVID is a reset. It is a reset. We were hurtling so far into this connectedness around the world that the virus came along and it sort of put a stop to some of the things that we were doing. Look at some of the benefits. My family gets a cooked meal every day. We sit together. My kids actually don't know what I do because I'm working from home, and they finally see, you know, all the things that I'm working on. There are some side benefits. However, I agree with everything that's been said. We are in danger, and I've been saying this for probably a year now as I started tracking the digital things that were being forced upon us from a healthcare perspective, is that we're in danger of creating a two-tier system of the haves and the have-nots, and the have-nots are getting bigger and bigger while the haves are getting smaller and smaller. And that will cause chaos. You know, we can go back in history. We humans never learn from our history, but you ask the czars in Russia about what happened to them once they had too many small people, sorry, a small group of people controlling the bulk of the assets of a country, for example, right? So I think we're headed that way, and I think you're right. We have to address the inequality and the disparity stuff is the stuff that we need to really work on harder than we are at the moment.
One of the best things I've heard in this whole discussion, and Val, you can say anything, but what you said about Governor DeWine working with the Democratic mayors is about the most positive thing I've heard in a while, because we don't see enough of that in this country right now. And if we don't, we're not going to get to redress some of these issues. But go ahead. I think you were going to say something else.
I was, but on that point though, that's one thing I can tell you, that as we sit back, and I'm glued to all the stations each day to see what's going on, trying to read the tea leaves and see what's going on, I will tell you that's the one area we have not had to deal with, because he's been there. And even if the mayors and the governor have a disagreement about something, they do it offline and they do it together. And publicly, even the mayors are said, you know, my mayor has said on national news, he's done a great job. Now I will tell you, because it started to play out in the media, this group, you know, you got a group of people who, you know, want to run through Target with no mask on. There was a video that just surfaced I looked at last night. And so they really gave him a lot of mess. our health director, Dr. Amy Acton, was very good. I mean, she created her superstardom in her own self. She literally got ran out of office. And so there's that other side that's to this. But what I was going to say in all of this, I think the thing for us here in the States that we have to remember, we're not out of the pandemic yet. It's still here. We're not in second wave. We can't even get out of the first wave because, again, how we started it, we sort of didn't do it right in the beginning. And I'm really personally, my personal opinion is, I am personally afraid that if we do not get this stuff right, all the stats, all the stuff we're talking about right now, all the people who are disenfranchised, you know, from getting tested to getting traced. Some people don't want to be traced because of the fear of government. So we got that issue out there. To even if there does become a vaccine that may become available to people, if we don't get our hands around this, we're going to lose more Americans. We're going to lose more people. And to me, that's not a good thing to have on the radar for us as the nation. And I think it's going to hurt us with our standing globally. And so, again, there's things we got to do on the ground, but there are bigger implications, and we're still in the pandemic.
Well, you know, and there is some cognitive dissonance happening in the communications that are happening from on high. There's no question. Dan Elron, I know is here and had a comment earlier, which was about education, but he's such a smart guy. I would just invite him to come on and say anything he wants about what he's, hold on, I got to probably unmute him. Hold on. Okay, Dan, yeah, feel free to comment or ask a question or whatever.
Well, thank you.
Make you a panelist for a second so we can even see you. Okay, that's a special privilege you're getting, I think. Did I do that? Okay, ask your question or say something. You don't have to show yourself. I didn't mean to ambush you there.
Here we go.
Okay.
Yeah, hi. Great panel. Thank you, everyone. Really enjoyed the comments and the statistics, Matthew. It's always difficult to find one major cause for some problems. And one of the ones that I hypothesize when people outside the US ask me, I point to the education system. And I wonder if the panel can comment on that. It struck me, and I'm not 100% sure it's still true, that in China, every student in elementary school on any given day is studying the exact same thing, very exam-oriented. We all know about the schooling in Scandinavia, Germany. We have a very decentralized and evenly funded education system. And my intuition says this is probably one of the main factors for causing the disbelief in science, some of the health issues, and the inequality. And I'm curious what the panel thinks about that.
I would only say that's been one of my strong beliefs for about 40 years. Probably Val's best suited to comment on that, but anybody who has a comment.
I think you're correct. I think COVID has taught us about that in terms of the education system. If you look at how the United States education system is funded, it is different state by state, city by city, county by county. And the way that we have to fund education locally, really by a tax base, ours is on a tax levy. We're going out now for a renewal of a tax levy saying in the middle of a pandemic, please keep funding our kids because we got to keep educating them. And so I think that that's an issue. And I don't want to go there on if you look at even the nationally, what's happening with our education system. And so I agree with you. I think the pandemic is really shining a big bright light on the fact that there are inequities and disparities, which leads to the longer term life inequities and disparities because of lack of education. So I agree with you. Education is the floor. It is the base and the foundation.
Thanks.
I'd also add that's also part of the two-tier problem, right, David, and everybody else. I mean, it's we're talking about public education, but you have all the kids in privilege in private education, and we know we don't like the government involved in dictating to private education. So it's part of the two-tier problem.
It is it's a cultural issue. You know, you look at some of the cultures that have the uniformity of education or the places where those cultures have a strong belief in good for all, in Asia, particularly Japan, Taiwan, places like that, they've done fairly well, and even in containing COVID, because the belief is that we're all in this together and we need to raise all boats. I think culturally here in the US, the federal versus state versus regional versus local, I suffer from it here in New Jersey, where we've got county, then we've got the town, and then we've got the state, all taking a vig on your tax. And so where you have poorer neighborhoods, their education systems suffer, their hospital systems suffer. So it's both a structural issue. Somebody said education system needs to be completely disrupted. I violently agree with them. But I think it's also a cultural issue, and it gets politicized very, very quickly.
Yeah. Matthew, do you have anything to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, just I think that your point about disruption of education, I mean, you talked about healthcare and how digital has arrived. Obviously, anyone with a kid who's been at home in the last few months had to learn about remote education, and it feels to me like someone, not my kid didn't get it, but someone's kid got a good education that way, and actually the potential for whatever works digitally to scale dramatically around the country and potentially address some of that learning divide. If we got real focus on that as how do we make that happen, maybe that's a way to disrupt education in this moment in a way that would be very positive. I mean, I've seen things happen in India on that front with digital education that are really dramatic at the moment, and maybe something similar could happen here.
My son discovered Khan Academy when he was, I think, 12, and struggling with math because his dad's stupid. Passed, flying colors, and he was working with a professor in India on an iPad for an hour a day for $10 a month that he paid out of his own pocket money. I mean, wow, crazy.
You have an entrepreneurial kid. Listen, Dan, I'm going to promote you back to Roy. No offense, but I know we are past our time, so I just go a little longer. But honestly, if anybody's got to drop, they're welcome to do that.
I have to go, unfortunately.
I figured you might have to. So Ritesh, thank you for being here.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Although the next person who I wanted to I did tell one other person he could speak, Matt Quint. Where is he now? Let me just find him, and then we can maybe wrap after. He had some interesting stuff. Okay, here we're going to allow you to talk. Matt, you can say what you were going to say. Sorry.
Great, thanks, David. Yeah, I wish I could. Can you hear me all?
Yeah, identify yourself if you would too.
Yeah, so I'm Matthew Quint. I direct what's called the Center on Global Brand Leadership at Columbia Business School. I've done some events with Drew. It's great to be here. Would love to be in the room with all you guys chatting about all these issues. Fascinating. I've loved the Social Project Progress Index since it launched, Matthew. So, love all this stuff. I think, what David tapped me on was we're about to host an event on can pharma get reputation, a return on their reputation again? And it just tapped in. So we're about to have heads of communication from Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson on this panel in a couple of weeks. And this idea of like how well the vaccine will be distributed. And I think there's an interesting case of the stakeholder capitalism movement rather than shareholder capitalism, hopefully driving on that particular issue, what will be a much wider distribution. And that it will not, that will hopefully be not an area in which there's a wealthy and the non-wealthy, especially because the power of a vaccine comes from the breadth of its. So if you're wealthy and you get it, but the people who are poor aren't getting it, it's not going to make it go away. So it's in the incentives of the wealthy to have it be distributed.
It's an interesting point. And this is something Matthew would, I'm sure, have a lot to say about, but probably in another occasion. We've all been worrying all the last few years about how a small number of tech companies have more power than governments, and we've been wringing our hands about that. But right now, we seem to be in a position where we are hoping that a small number of pharma companies have more power than governments and make really good decisions for society on a global basis. And that is a very odd situation because they seem to be where a lot of the leadership is emanating from in terms of what really is possible scientifically if you believe in the science. And it was interesting, before he left, Ritesh said that Merck is really doing interesting things and may be one of the first with the vaccine, even though they haven't talked about it. And he's confident that their CEO is going to take some very responsible acts in terms of equitable distribution. Listen, I do think we probably should wrap because I'm the kind of person who could go forever on this. But and Matt, people here are asking about your conference. So could you just quickly, before you go back to not being able to speak, tell us how to go there?
Yes. So if you go to, if you type in Columbia Business School Brand Center, you will get to our website and you will see events hosted there. And now I'm going to you can sign up for our newsletter there too if you want.
Right.
And then you'll get information about all our upcoming events.
Thank you for that. So any final thoughts from anybody before we go? That we have, I mean, I think this idea of inequality in education being kind of the intervention vectors that we have to focus on the most is really powerful. And the data really underscored that here today, even more than I would have ever guessed. So I think our foursome really added to our understanding of this, and it's going to change the way we think of our event. Drew, do you have any final thoughts?
No, I know people got to run. I thought it was just a great conversation, and the hard work is ahead. Identifying the problems is always hard enough, and we need to do it. And now we got to somehow fix these problems, right?
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well,
yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Val. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, everyone.
Hope to see you both soon in real world somehow, and we'll probably be tapping into your brains again in the not distant future. So thank you.